Hi everyone, my name is Katie and we're just going to be doing a quick reading comprehension, sort of putting into practice all the skills that we've been learning. So today we're going to be working on passage 3 from LSAT prep test 49. And in this email, I'm going to screenshot the passage and send it all to you so that you can have it to practice on as well and follow along. But until then, I just wanted to give a brief sort of overview. So reading comprehension, remember the things we're looking for. There are only 3 types of passages. So you're pretty limited on the ways that you can write a passage. And so I really encourage you to view passages through this lens as opposed to science, arts and humanities, social science, or any of that. I think the most useful way to think about it is in terms of what is the author trying to do. So there's 3 ways, like 3 types of writing that the author can be doing. The author can either be writing something in an informative way, in which they're trying to teach you something, persuasively, which is when they're trying to convince you, or they're doing a cost-benefit analysis where the author is presenting 2 options and then the author is going to choose, almost like they're acting like a judge. So just to kind of go through that, informative, author is teaching us about a topic. So think of these in terms of LR, like the statements. We're not really having like that spicy main conclusion, author's opinion. We're more getting a series of statements. So it's usually centered around a particular topic. It can be answering a question, and we know it's informative because we have a more detached author. So next is persuasive. This is the one that we're the most familiar with because this is the format we see the most on logical reasoning. So the author is convincing us. A big sign that it's persuasive is we're sort of looking for this format of a universal truth, the author dissenting from the truth, and then the author spending the rest of the passage trying to convince us that their opinion is correct. So for instance, the example I always give is lots of people think rainbows are beautiful. However, rainbows are terrible for the environment. Like that's, again, our overall universal truth is that many people think rainbows are wonderful. The author is dissenting from that in their spicy opinion by saying they're bad for the environment. And we can now infer that the rest of the passage is going to be the author convincing us as to why rainbows are bad for the environment. Finally, we've got cost benefit. In this, the author is playing judge. So this is where I find they come up the most in law passages. So they'll be debating whether or not visual display should be used in a courtroom, and they'll give all the pluses, all the minuses, and then in the end, the author will make a decision. So that decision can either look like picking a side, saying both of these are terrible, saying we don't have enough information to make a decision, or both of these arguments are bad, let me give my recommendation. So the way I always tell people to start is that read that first paragraph. And if you're reading the first paragraph and you see a very clear author statement, like a very clear persuasive statement, you automatically know it's persuasive. Where it gets a little dicey is when we don't really have a strong author statement, because that means we're now stuck between informative and cost benefit. So this point down here, author attributing thoughts to others, in an informative passage, because there's no questions, because the author's not trying to convince us, the author is just trying to teach us, the author is going to take ownership for all the information. So going back to the rainbows example, we could have rainbows are beautiful and make everyone happy. That is a statement. Like there's not, the author is taking ownership of that information, as opposed to scientist John Bob advocates for rainbows and says they're phenomenal for the environment. That's an example of the author giving us information, but not attributing themselves to it. Nowhere in that statement has the author said that they are the ones who think that. They're attributing all the opinions to scientist John Bob. So keep that in mind as we're going to go through a passage. Hi, okay, so I hopped into PT49 and then passage 3. So I'm not gonna read the whole thing out loud, but because I'm gonna send you guys the recording, so this would be a good place to kind of stop and read this first paragraph before hopping back in. So the very first thing in our roadmap we need to do is we need to identify what type of passage this is. So to do that, remember, we're either looking for a spicy statement. If we don't have a spicy statement, then we're looking for, is the author attributing information to themselves or is the author attributing information to others? So here we actually get a really great illustration of what a universal truth and then a spicy statement looks like. So let's just look at this first sentence. Surviving sources of information about women doctors in ancient Greece and Rome are fragmentary. Some passing mentions by classical authors, scattered references in medical works, and in about 40 inscriptions on the tombs and monuments. Yet, okay, so something that is kind of common in LR is you're looking for these transition words. Now, if you're someone who is having trouble reading the passages, like transition words and highlighting them can be a great way to sort of teach yourself like when to look for certain cues. So words like yet, but, however, those are all transition words that indicate that we're changing topics. Words like so, moreover, those are words that are suggesting support for information. So here with this, yet we know that we're taking a turn. And so taking a turn, especially super early on, should be a sign for us that the author is now dissenting. So if we read this, yet even from these fragments, remember, we want to make sure that we're always replacing our modifiers with what they're modifying. So we're talking about the surviving source of information. We can piece together a picture. Okay, so that becomes our thesis. So the author is trying to persuade us that the surviving sources of information from Greece and Rome are like enough to piece together a picture. So this is going to be, and I'm going to open my roadmap here. So the author is persuading us that the I don't even know if you can see this. I'll do a broader screen. I was kind of limited in how much space I could share. That the fragmentary sources of information about women doctors in Greece is sufficient. Okay. So that is our passage, and that's our thesis, and so that's what the author is going to try to convince us of. So all of this information down here is all supporting the author's argument. It does go down to in here, like talking about how the beginning of women in medicine doesn't begin with Elizabeth Blackwell, but again, that's all coming back to the central idea that we can rely on these sources, like this is enough to give us a broad picture. I'm going to move my screen so you can see what I wrote so far. So that is our first. So now let's scroll down to, okay, I guess we don't have to scroll down. We can just look at it here. Okay, so this is going to be another incident where I'm going to recommend everyone pause and read the next paragraph. So looking at this, the very scant nature of evidence tells us something. There's no list of women doctors in antiquity, no direct comment on the fact that there are such people. Instead, the scattering of references to them indicates that although their numbers are probably small, women doctors were an unremarkable part of ancient life. Okay, so again, now that we know that we're looking for persuasive tactics, so the paragraph opens with sort of saying that, kind of turning the central argument on its head, like the universal truth on its head. So the universal truth is we don't have a lot of evidence, thus they must not exist. But the author here is saying, no, there's not a lot of evidence because they did exist and it was unremarkable. Additionally, then the author gives an example about the Republic, and it talks about a source that identifies female doctors as well as male. So if we're trying to write a sentence that summarizes all of us, we would say the author is persuading us by, I would say, refuting the scarcity argument and then showing Plato's Republic as evidence of female doctors. So again, we're just writing a quick little sentence that sort of summarizes what this paragraph is doing to enhance the argument. Great. All right, let's move on to our next paragraph. Okay. Moreover, okay, so again, another transition word that's showing support. Despite evidence that some of these women doctors treated mainly female patients, their practice was clearly not limited to midwifery. Both Greek and Latin have distinct terms for midwife and doctor, and important texts and inscriptions refer to female practitioners as the latter. Okay, so again, pause and read this whole paragraph. But what we're really getting out of this is we're getting more examples of that evidence. So we're getting evidence through the two distinct terms. We're getting evidence from an epitaph. So this is important. So when we make our little sentence, the author is persuading us by providing more evidence, and then we can say language, epitaphs show women doctors existed. So easy peasy, all of this is just support on support on support. Okay, next page. Also pointing to a wider medical practice are the references in various classical medical works to a great number of women's writings on medical subjects. So again, pause and read this whole thing. So again, we're getting more evidence. This time we're getting evidence as female authors in medical works. And then we get some examples of authors, and they cite them, and they don't like specify anything about them being women. So let's go in here. The author is persuading us by providing evidence from medical books that do not distinguish male practitioners. So as with our roadmap, like again, we decided this was persuasive, and we knew that because of the transition words and the greater truth. Then we also, through this, made ourselves a little roadmap that's going to outline the different subjects of the 4 paragraphs. All right, so now that we did that, it's time to look at these questions. So predicting is going to be the best way to sort of handle reading comp and to get better at the questions. So here, which one of the following most accurately states the main point of the passage? Well, from our roadmap, we already discussed that the main point is all about persuading us that the fragmentary sources are sufficient. So we know we're looking for something about the evidence being enough. So let's look here. There's a range of textual evidence indicating that the existence for accepted part, yeah, is looking pretty good. So with reading comp, I suggest you shop answer choices. So that means that you start with the first one, and each answer choice has to beat the one on top of it. Some scholars in ancient Greece made little distinction in their writings between, as can especially be seen. No, that's not doing anything. That's not getting to the heart. Remember, we're looking for something about the evidence being good. Although surviving ancient Greek about women, little biographical, important inferences can be drawn. Again, like that's something that supports the argument, but that's not getting to the crux of the argument. Ancient texts indicate that various women doctors were not only practitioners, but also researchers. No, we only know that they were doctors. We don't know anything about researchers. Scholars who have argued that women did not practice medicine until recently are mistaken insofar as they haven't misinterpreted the evidence. They just didn't think it was sufficient. So A is going to be our answer because we're talking about all the evidence and the evidence being enough. Okay, let's move on. Which one of the following does the author mention in the passage? Okay, so when we're looking at reading comp questions, there are 2 types of questions. Ones that look for explicit proof and ones that look for implicit proof. So explicit proof is asking you almost to do a little like scavenger hunt in the passage. So it needs to exactly say it, or if not exactly, like basically it needs to be pretty perfect, as opposed to implicit, where we're basically saying like, based on the information you read, like what do you know? Okay, so let's look here. Directly mentioned. So because we have the word mention, we know that this is asking us for direct proof. Okay. So diseases that were not curable in ancient times but are readily cured by modern medicine. No. When did we talk about diseases? A specialized field of medicine that was not practiced by women in ancient Greece and Rome. What? That doesn't make any sense. Like what medicine was specifically mentioned? A scholar has argued that Francesca de Romano was the first female doctor. We do have this, but we don't have the scholar who argues this. The extent to which medical doctors in ancient Greece and Rome were trained and educated. Do we learn how they were educated or just that they existed? Finally, ancient writers whose work refer explicit to the writings of women. Yeah, because remember, we've got our evidence, we've got Plato, we've got these authors down here. So this is it. So try to see the difference between direct, like we specifically can point to this and from Plato. So when we find something that is implicit, like make sure you're noting the distinction between the two different types. Okay. Primary function of the third paragraph. Okay, so this is kind of like a rule in the reasoning question. So we're going to look at our paragraph, and because we have our roadmap, that should kind of give us a cheat to this question. So we are looking for this question in relation to the broader picture. So here we've got the third paragraph in our summary is the author is persuading us by providing more evidence. Okay, so it's a supportive paragraph to the main point. Provide additional support for the argument presented. Yeah, support looks good. Suggest that the implications of the arguments are unnecessarily broad. No, remember, we're looking for support. Acknowledge some exceptions to a conclusion defended in the second paragraph. No, remember, this is all support. We're not looking for exceptions. Emphasize the historical importance. No, remember, we're looking for support. Moving on, describe the sources of evidence. Describe the source of evidence that are cited in the first two in support of the author's main conclusion. Third paragraph, again, we're mentioning some, but we're not mentioning all the evidence cited in these two. So A is going to be it, providing additional support for the argument. Moving on. Which of the following could be logically appended to the end of the final paragraph? So the final paragraph points to work and how it's not notable, that they're not mentioning it because it's not notable. So we have, it is only by combining the previously mentioned fragments, historians have been able, no. There are some women doctors apparently seem unremarkable. Okay, that looks pretty decent. Although the content of each of these excerpts is of limited informative value, the varied range of topics that they cover suggests that Plato's claim should be reevaluated. No, because remember, Plato supported us. These texts indicate that during a certain period, there were female medical scholars. This is a possibility. We don't know if there's female practitioners, but we at least know there's scholars. Okay, nevertheless, these writers even-handed treatment of male must be interpreted partly conflicting picture. We don't have a conflicting picture, so that's our best answer. Okay, which one of the following most accurately describes the author's attitude towards the source of information mentioned in the first sentence of the passage? Again, we're looking for positive. Because remember, the author does think it's enough. Wary, no, we're looking for supportive. Optimistic, more complete. They're not saying we need to be more complete. Hopeful that they will come to be accepted generally, maybe. Confident they are accurate enough, yes, there we go. So we want something that says that they are enough. And convinced their appropriateness, no, they're convinced enough. The tribute quoted in the last sentence of the third paragraph. Okay, here we go. Savior through knowledge of medicine. So again, the point of this, if we go back to our roadmap, is saying that women doctors existed. Acknowledges authorities by other doctors. Okay. Maybe not other doctors, more people. Highly educated. There's nothing in there for that. Very effective at treating illness. Nothing in there at that. Engaged in general medical practice? Yes, because remember, they're trying to say that they're not midwives, they're doctors. And finally, the passage most strongly supports which one of the following inferences about women in ancient Greece and Rome? Okay, so this is an inference, so we're trying to think of something that we can guess based on what we read. Short time? We're not doctors, we're typically expected. How would we know that? There is no known official record that any of them were licensed to practice general med. I guess we don't have anything yet, so we can keep it. There's no reliable evidence that any, that's a little strong. Some of those who practice medicine were posthumously honored for non-medical civil accomplishments. We don't know anything about non-medical civil accomplishments. So C is the only one because we're not seeing something explicit that says, we're kind of inferring it. So that's how we get to this. All right, so that's the passage. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.